Hello, and welcome to the Sensibly Speaking podcast. This is Chris Shelton, the critical thinker at large, coming at you on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, and with video here on YouTube. Rumored that we're on iHeartRadio and other platforms as well, but those are the ones that I know I stream to. So, hey, everybody, we are going to have another hour of podcasting greatness here, and we are going to tackle the subject of apostasy head on. And obviously, I'm an apostate. Most all, of the ex-Scientologists I've interviewed, ex-JWs, ex-Mormons, ex-this, ex-that, they're all apostates. And apostasy and apostates is a sometimes used as a bad word. Scientology has certainly positioned this as a bad thing. And I've talked often, railed against the fact that in the academic world especially, we seem to have a real bias problem with apostates and with people, former members of religious groups, destructive cults. We have a problem with, people like James R. Lewis, who wrote this whole, Scientology book. And they basically will just flat out say apostates can't be believed, cannot be listened to, cannot be utilized in order to better understand the groups from which they came, which on the most casual of inspection is the most ridiculous assertion you could possibly make, because you can't just look at all the prose or promotional material that comes out of some of these groups and believe that that's all there is. A well-rounded look at a group includes looking at its critics as well as its, the people who support it. And in the case of academia, this has been a problem that has existed for a really long time and still exists. So it was with some surprise and happiness that I was contacted by my guest this week. And let me tell you a little bit about him. His name is Hari Parekh, and he is been working in the field of psychology, actually got a master's, and wrote a paper, an academic grade paper. This is not just some article in medium.com. And in it, the article is called Apostates as a Hidden Population of Abuse Victims. And that immediately caught my eye because, of course, we talk on this channel often about trauma survivors, abuse victims of destructive cults and religious groups. And I'm going to read you the abstract of his paper because it reads in plain enough English, I think, you guys. So I think we can all track on this. And then we're going to get into talking about this. Now, Hari is a graduate of the University of Nottingham in the UK. He's over there in Britain land. So, but that doesn't stop us from communicating here. So let me just go over this so you kind of set the tone of what we're going to be talking about here, because we're going to be getting into apostasy, how academia has dealt with apostasy, and how law enforcement has dealt with this, because there's a lot of problems here. And this is cross-cultural. This is not just in the UK that this is a problem. We have huge problems here in the United States with this, and of course around the world. So here we go. The term apostate describes the term used by the religious to describe individuals raised within religious families who once identified as religious, but who have ceased to believe in the existence of gods, or follow their religious belief, and now identify as non-religious. Given the strong feelings families can have about the rejection of their shared faith, and the difficulty that police forces may have in identifying and understanding the complexities of violence toward the apostate, this study sought to examine the possibility that apostates represent a hidden population of abuse victims within religious households. Now, you and I both know about the fact that these abuse victims and trauma survivors are out there because we talk to them. I've had them on my show. But law enforcement doesn't seem to be aware of the fact that this is actually a problem. And I realized that this might help answer the question here in the United States and around the world. Why do these groups get away with what they get away with? Why does law enforcement seem to give them a pass over and over again? Well, just getting law enforcement to believe and then understand the problem is itself a problem. And that's what we're going to talk about with this as part of this paper. The study was done to actually look into this. Says here, continuing on with the abstract, we recruited 228 persons, 102 males, 119 females, from an online survey. By the way, Harry works and is involved with the Humanists UK, and it was through that group that they did this. And let's see here, just skipping over a few things. It was found that persons who identified as apostates experienced more assault, i.e., harmful violence, than non-religious persons. Within this sample, Muslim apostates were significantly more likely to be victimized than Christian apostates. Disclosure of being abused for identifying as an apostate within a religious household to law enforcement was extremely uncommon, thereby preventing detection or prosecution of abusive acts committed by family members and limiting public awareness of this issue. These results are discussed in the context of the broader culture of honor-based violence. Anybody heard about honor killings? Well, that's a thing. It's a real thing, and it affects a whole lot more people than we might imagine it does. And this is, of course, occurs across Eastern Mediterranean, Middle East, North Africa, and is also seen in some Protestant Christian subcultures and common to all Abrahamic religions rather than Islam alone. This study highlights that within a multicultural society, there remain hidden populations of abuse victims who are vulnerable due to religious, cultural, and traditional constraints made by abusive family members. All right. This paper will be available as a link in the description section of this video. Harry, welcome to my show.
Thank you for having me.
Glad to have you. Let's go ahead and I talked about your psychology background, that you're a graduate with master's from Nottingham University.
Yeah.
Okay, and your discipline was just psychology in general, or?
It was forensic and criminological psychology. So the
excellent, the good stuff,
the
really interesting stuff.
Yeah, basically looking at the difficulties of criminality, forensic risk, that kind of stuff. Yeah,
Excellent. Now you are you have a Hindu background. Mm-hmm. You are yourself an apostate.
I am,
but you were raised Hindu. How now? And we talked briefly about this, but I want the audience to know what is your religious background? How are you approaching this, and how did it come into your purview that this is something that should be talked about in academia?
So raised as a Hindu, mom and dad are very religious as well. What was interesting is that my aunt got married when I was young, and the Hindu ceremonies, you have the priest and they do their thing, and spend a bit of money to get them there. And I remember sitting next to the priest, and the priest is chanting the shlokas or the mantras to kind of to get the gods to bless the wedding and that kind of thing. And there he is, he's talking in Sanskrit and he's doing it, and there I am copying him word for word, verbatim, as he's saying it. And I think my granddad once said, he was just like, we could have saved a bit of money, we could have just put Harry in the middle of that, and then it would have been easier. But that's, the religiousness was quite, it was accepted. I understood it. It's pretty much part of that family structure. And as you know, when you're brought up within it, you learn it, you believe it, you accept it, you learn about it, you read about it, and you rationalize it so that it makes sense with society that you're in. I once delivered a talk on leaving Hinduism, And I said, AC Grayling, the professor, was in the audience, and I said, oh yeah, I did A-level philosophy, and yeah, I tried to rationalize it to Hinduism, and didn't succeed, and it made him laugh. And that's the point, in that it was accepted. It's the norm, and it was part of the way that life was. And I was pretty religious anyway, because also we went through a good 10 years plus of racism and hate crime at home. So when you're in the moment of being kind of criticized, or kind of when the color of your skin and the fact of who you are and the identity of who you are is being questioned based on the fact that you don't belong here, despite being, born and bred in Nottingham itself. Well, actually, what else do you have to kind of assert yourself and kind of figure out who you are? And religion's a brilliant kind of safety blanket. It's a great opportunity to kind of realign yourself and to find that level of comfort and safety that people need. So that kind of pushed forward that religiousness. Didn't do well in school, didn't do well in college, got through to university in Northampton through difficult means, but finished that with a first class honours in psychology and criminology. So, life turns it around. But I left my religious faith in my second year of undergraduate, realizing that actually, as you know, as your audience would know, if you go to university, you have those long conversations at night, which mean nothing, but they happen anyway, and they're the best ones. I had a conversation like that with my housemate Tim, and it was from that conversation where he challenged me a lot. And actually, what I realized was that a lot of my thoughts, or a lot of the principles that I had, were less based on the religious faith in itself or the culture or the tradition, was just based on humanity. And those kind of principles made me realize and figure out that actually maybe it's not the religious faith that got me through, the difficult times back at home and kind of got me through to where I am. Actually, maybe it was just me externalizing my issues out there into the religious faith. And it still required my internal drive to want to do something about that and still carry on. So when I kind of realized that and figured that out, I was kind of, well, actually, maybe I'm not so religious after all. Told my mum and dad over Skype, which was interesting. My dad's from India originally, so having that conversation with my dad was a very tricky thing to do. But I couldn't fault them at all. They haven't wavered in how they treat me. They treat me the same as they always have, and they still respect me the same way that they always have as well.
Now, how rare is that in the Hindu culture? I mean, I'm going to admit straight up, I know almost, nothing, or at least I feel I know almost nothing compared to the vast body of knowledge that is the Hindu religion. I've never cracked the Vedas. I've heard of them. I know what they are, but I've never once cracked them open and said, "Hey, I want to read these things," right? Or any of the other, fundamental. Yeah, exactly, right. Hubbard in Scientology referred often to, well, not often, but often enough to the Vedas, and tried to make it out that Scientology was built on that same framework and
Really?
was inspired by and that sort of thing. So I became familiar with what these things are, but as far as the actual culture, the layout, how India is organized, I can't really talk intelligently about that.
How long?
How rare is it for your experience to tell your folks, you have this Western university education? It could be interpreted that you were talked out of your religion. I'm not
Could,
saying that's what happened. I'm saying it could be interpreted that way, right? You have these long conversations with, other people who are like, well, what about this? They're challenging your ideas.
yeah.
How did that go?
I think that if you go to university and you don't do that, then have you really been?
Exactly. I think the same thing. I think that is the most valuable part of university
Yeah,
is getting yourself out there and meeting people you would never have met otherwise from even other countries, and being
yeah.
able to get lots of different views of things.
And I think that having that opportunity to reflect in those moments and come to a decision, again, leaving a religious faith isn't a decision you make overnight. It's not something you go, ta-da, I'm gonna, everything's fine now, this is it, this is what I decided. It's not like, you at the end of the day, being religious isn't just about, going through the rituals and going through it. It's about that personal relationship that person has with that sense of that belief or that God, or whichever way you want to take it. Hinduism is very good like that. You have the number of, we have a plethora of different ways to reach a supreme Godhead, and you choose the way you need, you choose the way that works best for you based on, some gods have different personalities, and you find the ones that kind of work similar. Now, does leaving it and does making a statement like that, and is that very normal or is that abnormal, or what happens to an ex-Hindu? Doesn't happen. Nobody is. The amount of ex-Hindus that there are. Just look at the research. They're hidden. You only have to look at people like Sanal Edamaku, who basically is a rationalist from India, who found that who started to crack the conspiracy theories of the God men and the various kind of miracles that are in India, and he's currently in exile somewhere else. You only have to look at the way that people within treat the people that question it and go, well, actually, what's going on here? Maybe it's not what we think. There was a statue of, this is interesting. I think it was a Catholic church in India. They had water coming from Jesus's feet at the bottom of the cross, and they thought it was a holy water thing. They were spreading that around as kind of blessings from Jesus and things like that. They realized it was, and this is kind of where Sanal comes in, because he found that it was I think it was like a sewer pipe or something that then came out of the feet of Jesus, something like that, and that's what was being offered as prashad or as blessing. So again, taking a rationalistic point of view of thinking about things in a different way, regardless of the religious faith, at the end of the day, you're challenging the beliefs that people have. And then when that forms an identity, you're then challenging their identity formation and going, well, actually, I don't believe that to be as consistent as you might think. We're then basing our conversation of going, I don't believe, on the hope that the reaction to that is ordered or is done in a humane way. We hope it's done in that way, and many times it isn't. Within Hinduism, what you'd find is it's layered. So you might have people that might not believe in the religious aspect of it per se, but it's incorporated itself within the tradition and within the culture and within family households and communities, and the way that it's kind of evolved itself from going, you can pick up a Bible, you pick up a Quran, and then read it through and go, okay, that's basically what I need to understand, or the Hadith or whatever. Hinduism's different because the way it is different. It's the system of the lot. It's completely different to that way. So it's looking at life in a completely different way. It's understanding life in a completely different way. So leaving it means that you've just given up a way of life. You've just given up. You can't give up culture. You can't give up tradition. You can't leave. And it's going, well, actually, what I've left is the fundamental view that I've left the belief to believe in that way. The culture and the traditions that, the traditions are the rules that are enforced by dead people, and the cultures are social contracts that people use to kind of keep people together. So whichever parts of that I take with me is based on whatever I think works with me now. Like, I still love my Indian classical music, and I love the Indian classical arts. Now, one would argue that it comes from the Samaveda, and actually you can't, as an apostate, it's completely cognitive dissonance to enjoy the Indian arts when you know the origin. The origin was so many years ago, like it was the first piece of text ever written. The way that the arts have evolved, you can accept the origin of things, but it doesn't mean you can't then still appreciate it. I went to Rome in August. I still went to the Vatican because you can't not appreciate Do you know what I mean? You can't
Of
not take a
course.
cheap selfie of that, of Michelangelo's, the famous piece of artwork without the guards knowing that you've done it, and still appreciate the fact that it's there. So I think that it's a bad shtick, really, that the religion is that, just because you're an apostate, you can't then take anything with you. It's dual
Well,
citizenship.
it
You're one
would be
there.
impossible. It's simply impossible. And you bring up a point that I'd like to highlight and talk about a little bit, which is the cultural that that I think some people maybe in the atheist community, certainly how they communicate, whether they really think this way or not, how it's communicated is you get the impression that it's just so easy. Why do people believe in God? Why would they? It's just a silly belief, as though it exists in a vacuum and it's just this thing
Yeah,
that sits there, this belief in God. And you go, man, no, this has. I mean, because it's the same for. I was thinking about this from what we were talking about with Hindi and how it is an entire culture there. There's this whole cultural thing going on. Well, Islam is the same. I mean, Sharia is not just about religious belief. I mean, you're talking
no,
about economics, you're talking about family life, you're talking about all kinds of rules and structures for your
exactly.
entire way of life. And can we really look at the South of the United States and say that's not going on there? It's an entire culture. I mean, these are people who have crosses on their lawns that are like 2 stories high. I mean, these are
Yeah,
committed people. This is not just a single simple belief. And I think that has a lot to do with some of the troubles that get caused when people renounce that single belief. They go, well, this part of it I'm not going to be doing anymore, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're renouncing all of it. Could you even renounce all of it if you've raised in a culture, all that sort of thing? For example, I can believe that L. Ron Hubbard ain't all that anymore, but I could still walk away with his ideas of exchange in my head, that you need to exchange with people for things. And that can be good or it can be bad, depending on how extreme I am in my beliefs about that. I just
yeah.
wanted to point out that it's a little bit more complicated than a simple God belief or God's
Uh,
belief.
I think you've touched on it really, really well. In that, I think that even I remember it, because when I left the religious faith and I realized that I feel very isolated having done so at university, I then started my own society to act as a support structure for people that might go through such a transition at university. Now, in order to kind of, and at Northampton at the time, there was a very strong, ISOC, Islamic Society. There's a very strong Christian Union. The thought of leaving a religious faith, heck, from a brown guy, is pretty unheard of technically. And there I am in the library with the Islamic Society and the Christian Union, and here's me going, "Hi, I'm the Atheist Humanist Secular Society here in Northampton," and it's kind of this um, puzzlement of going, "What are you doing? Do you not know your history, and do you not know your origin? Do you not know?" That your the color of your skin matters here. And it's like, all right, there's a race argument brought back again. And it's kind of like you're a traitor to the fact that you've left. It's a really interesting dynamic. And interestingly, in that period of, I think it was like 2 years ish, you know, because I ran my society and I was doing talks and whatnot, and I had to kind of cement the fact that this is an actual thing that happens here. I had to solidify that within the university or within the perception of it. I was very strongly, atheistic in my method, in going, I don't believe in it, very angry, Chris, you go onto YouTube and you listen to Christopher Hitchens enough times, you kind of accept the rhetoric and you kind of work with that. Now, I think that once that society did really, really well, and it was the first society to receive awards from the Student Union within the UK, and I moved on to do my master's at Nottingham, as you mentioned, and I started working for the student sector in Humanist UK, and eventually I started running the organisation, running the sector, and kind of having a bigger part of that. it's no different from going through the kind of Kubler-Ross grief cycle, right? You kind of go through that denial, the anger, the depression, the bargaining, and the acceptance through, through having left that religious faith, or having left that belief in God, or lost that attachment, even relationship with that belief that you had. And I think that when you kind of work through all of that and you come to perhaps the stage I'm in at the moment, I'm not as ardently angry as I used to be, and actually, the amount of stuff that I used to go, that's just BS, or that's just this, or that's just that, as you kind of do. Actually, you know what? I've taken a lot. I'm a lot more kind of lenient in my perspective, and going, well, actually, I brought in half of this as well. I can't get rid of it, and actually, I want to bring in half of this because it means X and it means Y, and it matters and it's meaningful. So, yeah, I think the thought that leaving it is an easy thing, why can't you just do it? I mean, I did a talk recently at Conway Hall, and one of the speakers on the panel was Christian, and he was just like, well, just leaving it when I had my doubts would have been the easiest thing to do. But I chose to stick at it, and it was through that rigor that got me through it, suggesting that this was an easy decision to make. And I kind of had to state really clearly that this is a really bad assumption that the religious have, that this is an easy decision to make. It's not. You have to think about, am I going to have a family after this decision or not? Do I even bother doing it? I might as well just do this in my own little lives around the corner and then just do what I need to do anyway. And if nobody knows, then what difference does it make? Economically, I'm secure, or emotionally, I'm secure. Why would anybody go through the notions of thinking this one decision will mean that I will have no family, and I will have no ties, and I'll have no attachments to the people that have brought me up? If it was an easy decision to make, it just wouldn't happen. And there are countless people out there that have had that experience as well.
Exactly.
So it's not an easy decision.
I wonder, just as a general comment here, again, we can't paint with too broad a brush, but one wonders at people, believers, theists, who talk about how easy it must be for apostates to just, walk away, leave it, or whatever. I think they are perhaps projecting or giving up there that that religious belief is hard for them. It's difficult for them to maintain it, to go through the to keep the cultural norms and practices, and go every week, read the book, memorize the scriptures and whatever. There's work there. For some people, that's very hard work. And so I imagine that they, have to make apostates into bad guys by making them the opposite. Well, it's just easy for you, right? It's hard for me. I have to go through all this, and you just get to walk away as though it's no big deal, right? I mean, it's typical in group, out group, making the enemy out of, into something that's the opposite of what you are. But it shows, I think, a little bit how much work believers have to put into reinforcing the beliefs and keeping them solid and keeping them strong and keeping the rituals up and stuff,
And this is the thing, like, it doesn't end with making the decision. It only just begins.
Exactly.
So like, the way that I usually explain it is, if you've watched Lion King, which I hope you have, and if any of the viewers or listeners haven't watched it, then watch it, pause this, go and watch it, and come back, because spoiler alert. The bit in Lion King where Mufasa dies and Simba is told by Scar to leave as a result, and is blamed for the death of Mufasa, chased by hyenas to kill him, he actually escapes as well. You then have the scene where he's wandering through the desert for however many weeks or whatever, and he gets to the point where he just collapses. That's the apostate. That's the apostate who was once part of that clan and that herd, made a decision, and Simba didn't make the decision, but he was part of it, being told, in that moment, that you need to leave and you're no longer welcome here, which a lot of ex-Mormons, ex-JWs, ex-Scientology as well, you face, where you're completely excommunicated as a result of that. And then in some cultural states, you'll then you'll be sent the death threats or whatever, and that represents the hyenas. And the fact that you're wandering through the desert is that you're wandering through that desert alone, because all of the attachments that you had, and this is pure psychology, all of the attachments that you've had from growing up, all the ways that you've found stability with you as a human being, have all just been, they've all just died, because they've basically gone, we have nothing to do with you anymore, and you're basically wandering a desert on your own. And that's where you get your mental health issues. That's where you get your increase in depression, stress, isolation, suicidal thoughts, whatever.
Right.
No wonder it's a difficult thing until you find your Timon and Pumbaa. So until you find that one thing that gets you out of bed and gets you going, until that point, you're literally just wondering and you're struggling, and it's difficult. Now, for anybody to then suggest that it's easy, that you get to go out and do whatever you want to do, and I got to stay home because I got to do this and I got to do that. Well, there's no point. If anything, if we're going to create the dichotomy, well, it's all right for you, but it's not all right for me, then that just suggests that you want to do it, but you're holding yourself back by reinvigorating why you cannot do that, based on whichever part of scripture you want to use or whichever rationale you want to use. At the end of the day, if you want to do something, welcome to being human. I didn't drink when I was religious, and when I was non-religious, it took me another 6 months or 7 months to actually even have my first alcoholic drink, because I was like, that was a big step. It takes a lot of thought. It's not a simple thing.
No, it's not. It's a whole reacclimation into a different culture.
Even going a step further, it's about relationships, and it's about attachments, and it's, if you've had that, if you brought up within the religious faith as well, and let's say you're around you're like 2021, let's say, so you've been within a system of thought for around 21 years, and you've built attachments with a godhead or with a religious belief, and understood it and accepted it and provided that as the perspective that you hold, and you kind of rationalize things around you to kind of make it still make sense. It's no different to being in like a 20-year marriage or relationship, and then going, well, actually, you know what? Maybe this isn't for me, because maybe I don't think the same way. And interestingly, within that, you might have the people that go, well, hang on a minute, let's work through it and let's figure things out. But then you'll have the people that go, well, actually, you know what? I need to take a step back, figure stuff out, and then I'll make a decision. And enough times people will easily go back to the religious faith that they're in because of the stability and the security and whatnot. Making the jump of going, this ain't for me, I'm done, is a brave, and it's a step into the unknown. The difference between a relationship is that actually, you have to, you've still got friends and family around you that can still probably support you, perhaps. Whereas with this issue, actually, you're left on your own, with no one there. So it's a little bit different in that regards, but it has the same kind of emotional strings of it. Your whole life surrounded that one person, for example. How do you then support your brain to think in a different way that makes you not think of that person the way that you used to? It's torture.
That's right. It takes time. It takes time to deal with all of that.
And I don't. It takes a long time to get through it.
Yeah, exactly. I've been quote unquote recovering for 7 years now, and it just takes what it takes. This whole acclimation, reacclimation, relearning, reindoctrinating, meeting new people, reculturalizing, all of it. So it's difficult, and I think we've established that it's difficult. And people who say it's a breeze, or, well, I never had any problem with it because I just never believed it and stuff. Well, I tend to look at those guys as more of the as the rarer cases, as the ones that stand out to me as the more extreme examples of atheism, are the ones who, I never had any problem with this at all. My parents told me all this stuff. I never believed it. It was no big deal. That's not the experience of most believers.
It's an interesting position to have. Um, it comes back to this. I think the thought of going, well, my mum and dad believed it. It just didn't resonate with me. I've heard quite a lot of people say that. To be fair, in the amount of work that I've done since. The interesting thing, though, is that understanding apostasy means that you have to understand what religious belief is. Understanding what religious belief is means that you have to understand that it's not stupid.
That's exactly.
And
Exactly.
when
That's
you work on that premise, you then are able to appreciate what it is, why it is, how it is. Don't get me wrong, that's not, it's like the Magic Noirs quote, every idea is above scrutiny, no person below dignity. Now, it doesn't mean that I'm not going to scrutinize it just because I understand it. What I mean by this is that understanding how religious belief works means that you have an understanding of why somebody would. Now, ripping them off and going it's stupidity and they just need to grow up and it's just mythical beast or whatever isn't gonna work, because that's ad hominem and it's targeting the person, etc. The point that I'm trying to make, and I'm trying to articulate the words out, is that as an apostate, I've been there. I've accepted it. I've worked with it. I've understood it. I've defended it. I've lived it. I've read. I knew the history of it. I knew the shlokas in it. I knew every little nuance within it. I breathed it. For me to then move away from that and say I don't believe in the religious faith anymore, or anybody who believes it is just stupid, that's just a disservice to the fact that I was once there, or the fact that my mum and dad are still there, or my family are still quote unquote there. And actually, that would make me disingenuous to then hold the same view of going, well, that's just stupidity. It doesn't work like that. You know, it's no different for basically saying, look, here's the world around us. I have perspective A, they have perspective B. It's trying to figure things out around the world. That's the way they take it. Now, what they do with it, same with the non-religious, is a different matter. If you're going to harm somebody as a result of believing ardently and having the contention that you believe it, well, that's different from just having a perspective on the world. Then it's complicated.
exactly. Now, having established that this is a deep well and there are lots of factors to it and all that, in terms of if we're really going to talk honestly about religious belief and not just in memes, which we can do. I mean, there are whole shows that are built around that, right? Just like meme it away, and everybody who's believing is just stupid and they're all idiots and blah 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 blah. I think a lot of that probably comes out of the anger stage, people coming out of these groups. Because I'll tell you, I was sure pissed for a while, so I get it. I get it. So the effort here actually is where I want to direct this back to, is academia, though, because this has been a big bugbear for me. As a former Scientologist specifically, I've done whole videos, many of them, breaking apart, deconstructing academic papers, real published papers, peer-reviewed and all, by sociologists, religious scholars, psychologists on the subject of Scientology. And this is a subject that I know all about. So when they write about it from an ivory tower academic position, I spot exactly where they are just taking the Scientology promo word for word and just reprinting it and calling it an academic paper.
And validating it.
Exactly. And I just shake my head and I ripped into them, because that's just nonsense. That's not what academia is about, or should be about, is simply rewriting the promotional materials of destructive cults and then giving them a pass because ... freedom of religion. That is the most surface level, thinnest possible way of looking at any of these groups. And that's not what I believe academia should be doing. But we have a bigger problem way beyond just Scientology, which is apostasy in general is just not granted any real importance. And I'm totally talking from my own experience. I can't say I've, gone through all the literature because I don't even have access to all the literature. I'm not an academic. But the stuff I've seen that has made it out that I have looked at or done deep dives on has not been impressive.
Mm.
I understand and I completely agree with an objective view of any group and a recognition of their right to believe whatever they want. I am 100% down with that.
Yeah,
That doesn't mean that they have 100% pass to do whatever they want. And I think
precisely.
that's where we get into some confusions about, freedom of religion, freedom of belief, and let's respect that versus, okay, this religious belief system, let's like Scientology. I mean, if we're going to get into the deeper stuff, which we will, honor killings and that sort of thing, we then go into the mainstream religions. But
Yeah,
even with Scientology, they do things based on this belief system and based on their dogma that is just outright destructive, ruins people's lives, bankrupts them, tears apart families, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
mm,
This doesn't seem to get any real attention on the part of academia. And it seems to me that one reason why is because apostates are viewed as worthless. They have axes to grind. Their data is not reliable. We can't listen to them. This
bias.
is what
Yeah.
Lewis talks about, and some of these other guys. And it's just such a crime to the trauma survivors of these groups when you come out of these groups with a story to tell of trauma and abuse, and you're just roundly ignored by the people who are actually at the professional level of education on these topics. You get way more sympathy and understanding from the general public
Yeah.
than you do from academia, right? You just brush you off. This is problematic in the extreme, which is why when you sent me your paper and I read it, I went, ha, 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 hallelujah. Somebody's
Finally.
talking about this from a point of view that they actually are willing to acknowledge that there's a problem and start defining the problem. And you've defined it in a particular slant here. I went over your abstract a little bit. Why don't you tell us how you're approaching this and what this paper is about and what you're trying to accomplish?
So I think this is the foundation for the paper, even before it became a thing, was um, even if you go through the 5 stages of grief through the transition to apostasy, I was happy being Hindu. It was fine. Didn't have an issue with it, and I still kind of don't. It wasn't the big bad wolf in the corner. Don't get me wrong, I can critique it now, but within it, it wasn't a problem, and I was happy within it. And using that notion, the means for writing a paper wasn't to or isn't to ever look at religious faith and go, right, that one's bad, that one's bad, that one's awful, that one's da, 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 da. It was basically saying, what are people doing, right? Now, the way it started was as you said in the abstract, there's an organization called Faith the Faithless. They originally worked as their own organization to support apostates within the UK. And my work with Humanist UK meant that I met the founders, who are Imtiaz Shams and Ali Salim, who are brilliant people in their own right. And what I realized was my transition wasn't a normal transition. It's kind of like an anomaly to have had a transition where families, communities, etc., are still okay, and still, still fine. I was on the BBC on the Big Questions, and family members saw it, and I'm still fine. And it's nice when you go to a family gathering and they're like, "I saw you on TV," and it's like, "Did you listen to what I said?" "Yeah, I listened to what you said. It makes sense." That's brilliant. Um,
Definitely
so,
the exception, not
yeah,
the
so
rule.
definitely, yeah, exactly. So interestingly, despite the history of stuff, it's a very privileged apostate position to be in when I haven't had those experiences. I'm glad I haven't. Don't get me wrong, but it's very different to the usual norm. So when I started working with these guys, I realized, and I listened to the story. I listened to people's kind of verbatim stories of all the things that they've been through, and I'm like, wow, that's you know, I don't know how you've got through that. And that's when I started my masters, and you know, it was like, Harry, you need to pick a topic, and none of my topics were good enough. And you know, Vincent Egan, who's the second author, he was just like, what are you actually interested in? I was like, well, here's something that I do outside of all of this, and you know, this is what I found. And you know, I know that a lot of people are being abused for this. Like, people are actually being hurt as a result of leaving their religious faith. Like, you can make a, you know, you can choose a different thing, and you know, it's like, you know, you went to the supermarket and you chose apples instead of oranges, and you're being damned for choosing apples. It doesn't make any sense to me. Like, there are people being hurt and nobody knows. And he's like, well, how does nobody know? I was like, well, there's enough activists out there that are talking about it, and because they've gone through it. But there's nothing really in the academic community. And Vincent is amazing in his own right. And he's like, well, psychologically speaking, why would anybody know? People don't know. The academic community isn't going to know unless there's a paper out on it. Until then, it's just verbatim, and until then, it's just an experience. It's not scientifically rigorous. And he's like, do you think there's a lot of people out there? I was like, well, I'm sure of it. And I'm sure there are people out there. Now, to maintain scientific rigor, the argument was, you know, let's see if there are people out there, and let's see if we can find people that might have gone through difficult things as a result of leaving their religious faith. So that was, the notion wasn't to basically go, yeah, we know these people exist, let's just put this out there and figure it out. The notion was, well, actually, let's see if what the activists are saying is true worldwide, and people are being victimized as a result. So we ran with that.
Because all of us see at pathos.com or whatever, we see reports, you know, Hemant Mata is always posting stuff about people getting killed for apostasy. I mean, in the Middle East, this happens. But those are always one-offs. They're sort of like, well, they leave an impression, but you don't really know, you know, what are the numbers on this? I mean, is this an extreme case, or is this happening every other day and it's just not being reported on? So you guys dived in to find out.
But then on top of that, the privilege of religion is also part of that, because psychologically speaking, it provides a lot of stability, security, support, financial structure, emotional stability, economic stability. You know, it provides so much that it would always have a good, you know, any system and any organization that provides all of that will always have a good reputation within social circles when you're trying to understand human, you know, the way that people work. You know, and no wonder it hasn't had that level of critique or that level of introspection and going, well, actually, how good is it? And, you know, what's going on here? And as Vince always said to me, he was like, the fact that, and you know, this is after we got our data, so just jumping a bit, but the fact that there are hidden wrongdoings concealed by social norms means that we're missing victims, and we're missing abuse victims, and missing even one victim is more victim than it's more than, you know, we shouldn't be missing them. The fact of the matter is, therefore, is that if these social constructs and these social norms within a religious faith community, society, are providing the conditions where this level of abuse is being missed, somebody needs to challenge that.
Big time. Hey everyone. I'm sure you'd agree that learning about various perspectives can help us make sense of the world as it changes every day. Our own views are often narrow and focused only on what we already know. And it's only through learning new things that we can more easily see situations from multiple points of view, something that is vital for good critical thinking. The Great Courses Plus streaming service is an excellent resource to expand our knowledge on a variety of subjects. You can gain valuable, reliable insights from some of the world's best teachers, and that's a service you definitely want to take advantage of. This is why I love the Great Courses Plus. It's a fantastic way to keep our minds active while staying close to home. Plus, you can stream to your TV to watch as a family or just watch and listen on your phone or tablet using the Great Courses Plus app while out in the garden or taking a walk around the neighborhood. I've been enjoying the Great Courses Plus variety of classes on critical thinking and have also been checking out some of the courses offered now on infectious diseases and on media manipulation. These are vital to understand the world we live in right now and will broaden your perspectives too. There's so much more to learn about the world, so start today by signing up for the Great Courses Plus. They're offering my listeners a free trial of unlimited access to the entire library. Sign up today using my special URL to start your free trial. thegreatcoursesplus.com/critical. That's thegreatcoursesplus.com/critical. Sign up today.
This is where it kind of started, and we worked with Faith to Faithless, we worked with Humanist UK, we worked with the Peter Tatchell Foundation and the Council of Ex-Muslims for Britain as well. So we used a number of different, we didn't use them, but we asked a different number of organizations to spread out our online questionnaire that we had, and they did through social media. So the people that we got as a result were all from, social media kind of outreach and them basically sharing it. So I salute all of those organizations for the amount of support they gave it in those initial times. And we're talking back in 2015 is when this was in its day. So the 228 people that we got, what we found was this wasn't a British problem, this wasn't an American problem, or this wasn't just a let's just blame the Middle East and Saudi Arabia, despite you can blame them for a lot, but this isn't just one of those people over there. Actually, there was somebody from somewhere, everywhere, that was basically providing me with a story of going, this is how I've been threatened, this is how I've been this is how I've been that. And that's how it started, really.
Now you found, what did you find in terms of, let's talk numbers first, just to give people an idea of like, what are we talking about? Where did you looked at, a few hundred people. So obviously this isn't a sample size of thousands or tens of thousands. That would be a much, much deeper study. But with the study that you did do, you found some interesting stuff. What came up?
So that's the joys of finding hidden abuse victims, and that the first cohort ever to come out and go, I'm waving my flag, is never going to be the greatest of numbers. So in relation to numbers, what did we find? We found that so out of the number, so we categorized people based on birth, religion, and faith to where they are now. So 130 participants were Christian, 68 participants were Muslim, and 18 participants were non-religious. Out of those 130 that were Christian, only 12 are now. Out of the 68 that were Muslim, only 4 are now. And out of the 18 that were non-religious, 204 are now. So what we found was something that related to the trend at the moment was we had a 1,033% increase in people being non-religious now from before, which shows the trend of non-religiousness kind of peaking up at the moment as well. But what we also then saw was a 91 to 94% decrease in people identifying as identifying as religious now as well. We had people identify as Hindu, Sikh, Jain, Buddhist, Taoist, a number of different religious faiths. The problem was that the numbers within those other religious faiths were so low that they couldn't be statistically significant to be used for research. So we couldn't count them in. So that's why we looked at Christians and Muslims. And interesting, we had more Christians than we had Muslims, which is an interesting thought. So that was the first thing we saw. The second thing, we used the conflict tactics scale by Strauss and colleagues, and what that scale basically looks at is assault, serious assault, psychological abuse. So difference between being, pushed to the wall, to being threatened to be killed is the difference between assault and serious assault. And psychological abuse has everything from coercion to neglect to isolation and stress and all of those things that and all the kind of psychological quirks that are there when you decide to leave something as well. So being blamed and being kind of taunted and those kind of things. So what we found, and to make it really simple, is that within the study we group all of those. We group the assault, serious assault, and psychological abuse into one category of assault. So we group it into that to highlight that here's the abuse that's happening. And we found statistically it was significant for people from Muslim households who are Muslim apostates. They were more likely to face such abuse as a result, despite having a lower sample size within the study itself. They were more likely to actually have been victimized through that. Don't get me wrong, it's the same. It was still statistically significant from people from Christian households, but not as much as your Muslim household. So that's an interesting thought within the study. The interesting part on top of that was that it also looked at negotiation. So as we know, negotiation is a two-way street. It's, how do we understand each other better to then, come to an outcome kind of discourse on an issue. And that was insignificant throughout. So that's interesting. So the thought that we had for that was that perhaps families are listening to the fact that their family members have decided that they're not religious anymore. The problem is that despite listening to that and despite, even taking it on board, it's as if family members really struggle to accept that transition and find that really difficult themselves, which is understandable. They've had an attachment, they built something. And actually that then might cause the lack of negotiation, or the fact that the level of support for the apostate might dwindle, as we see from being excommunicated or segregated out. On top of that, what we also found, so not just about leaving the faith, was about how likely victims are likely to report their abuse to law enforcement within their own local area.
Yeah, let me ask you a couple numbers questions about this, because I need you to interpret the data for me on this.
All right, I'll try.
Out of your sample, yeah, I mean, if we can, out of the sample that you have, what percentage were Islamic?
So let me remember.
Because you had 110 males, 119 females out of 228 persons.
Yeah,
but I didn't get the religion breakdown particularly. Although you mentioned that there were issues with that in terms of identifying it, because Christians were labeling themselves as non-Christians or other if they were JWs, Mormons, etc., even though technically those are Christians.
Yeah, so it was a little bit tricky because because we used umbrella terms to decipher religious belief, we didn't go into the specificity of the individual sects of it. So I think that caused a little bit of, it was a little bit vague on our part, and it was a little bit kind of, that was the point, in that we didn't spend enough time looking at the intricacies of that, because we wanted to show the academic community whether this was a thing or not.
Understood.
We weren't bothered with 130 Christians, 68 Muslims, and 18 non-religious. So that percentage-wise, that kind of puts us in the bracket that there were near to 60% Christian, 30% Muslim, and then the rest is non-religious.
Right. And then interestingly, it's only interesting because I was surprised, well, maybe not surprised, but the largest faith community in the UK is Christian at 59%, and the second largest is Muslim at 4.8% of the population.
Yeah. Because a lot of people, because we've got, you got Catholicism, you've got the Church of England.
It breaks down. I'm sure the Christian mass breaks down in interesting ways. Does Islam break down
Yeah,
in similar ways?
yeah, because you've got Shia, you've got Sunnis, you've got Wahhabi, you've got Sufi, Salafi.
Right,
Um,
right. I was aware of
like,
Sunni and Shia. I wasn't sure how many other. Yeah, of
yeah,
course. Well, yeah, of course there are. Yeah. Okay, cool. So,
we didn't look. We weren't. Sadly, even though we had the opportunity, we didn't gather data on whether they were in a particular sect of the religious faith. Um, but that's the joys of doing research. You can always do another piece later and figure that out, right?
well, I'll tell you, it's very interesting because it was clear from the numbers you put together that there is a violence problem in the Islamic community at a higher rate than there is in the Christian community, just based on the numbers. I mean, you're taking a,
Yeah.
and because the number of reports, it seems, from what you found of what you call this the honor based. I don't know how it Izat.
Izzat, yeah, that's
Izat.
honor. Yeah,
Yes,
so
Izat. So
Nirvana.
Izat based violence, and we're actually talking now about real violence that happens in this community, or within this religious world of Islam. I
Yeah,
don't want to just harp on it, but I just have to talk about it from the percentages.
yeah,
In the UK, you have a vastly smaller number of Islamic believers than you have Christian believers, much bigger piece of the pie. But it
mm,
appeared that more violence was happening in this much smaller percentage of people, according to the survey that you did. But again, I
yeah,
know this isn't like, a smoking gun or something. It's just a pointer to more study, more research maybe needs to be done on that.
yeah.
Am
I
I
think
interpreting this incorrectly? That's what I really wanted to ask you is, am I
yeah,
seeing this wrong?
interestingly, because we had a this is the thing when I argue that it's a worldwide sample, and then you say, well, you only got 228 people. Why do you matter? And it's kind of like, well, actually, finding a hidden population in 228 is what happens when you try and find a population that's hidden. Um,
Oh, of course. And I hope I wasn't communicating that it didn't matter. That was not
no,
my
no, no, no.
point
I'm just
with your sample
clarifying.
size.
No, no, no. Of course not. I'm just clarifying. In
Okay.
that, even if we take the UK as an example, where there's a majority Christian, smaller Muslim population, smaller as you go, you only have to look at the case study of someone like Salman Rushdie when he wrote the Satanic Verses, and the amount of the amount of hate that was festered towards him as a result of releasing that book by the Muslim communities, in the UK, to the point where Ayatollah Khomeini decided to issue a fatwa against him, for example. Um, so again, I think when we need to be the addition to why the reaction might be so severe is that, number one, the scriptures, whether it's Christianity, Islam, whichever, the scriptures don't offer any leniency for anybody that leaves. We can say that with a lot of conviction.
Yep.
So we've got kind of written text which goes, this is what happens, and good, that's the fate of them, basically. So the scriptures don't offer any support. Second, it goes against a person's belief structure, and it goes against a person's identity formation, because it's part of them, and it's that strongly part of them as well. Thirdly, that level of community, that level of culture and tradition. When somebody's being threatened, a threat reaction is to fight, flight, or freeze. Now, if the scriptures are providing you with a kind of pass of going, well, this is what happens to apostates, good luck to them. And if you feel like your religious belief and your identity are being challenged, then how do you react to that? And the way that people react to that, as we know, is not in great means.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a very primal view of what happens when we're challenged, and it's human nature. And that's what we're dealing with here. I'm not dealing with the religious belief. I'm talking about the way that people react to feeling like their sense of themselves is being threatened. The apostate themselves is definitely said that they don't believe in the religious faith anymore, and they'll provide their reasons for it. The religious faith in itself can be scrutinized because it's an idea, it's a piece of, it's a text. A text can be scrutinized, and it's an ideology that people ascribe to, has to be scrutinized. Nothing is infallible. The notion of thinking that Quran or a Bible is infallible is not true, because it's still written. The amount of times, the fact that John and Paul were in the Middle East and wrote for Jesus. I mean, I'm surprised that there are people named Paul, Luke, and John within the Middle East in the moment. And second, it was still written again. Same for the Quran, it was still written. Muhammad, peace be upon him, didn't write it. His followers wrote it because he couldn't read and write. So again, it's a piece of written text. The Vedas, again, they say it's divinely inspired, but somebody had to write the damn thing. So if somebody's written it, then that provides I wrote an academic piece. People are going to look at that and they'll scrutinize it as much as they can. It's an idea. It's a view. It's a perspective. Scrutinize it.
Well, exactly.
It doesn't mean that we then scrutinize a person and going, well, you're wrong for believing that, and your perspective is wrong for that. That's ad hominem, and that's incorrect.
Well, and you're absolutely right. And from any rational, critical thinking, objective point of view, everything you just said is 100% correct. And in any church in the nation, everything you just said is 100% wrong, because they will tell you that these books are beyond skepticism or criticism, that they are divinely inspired. Men wrote them, but they wrote them inspired by the hand of God, etc. So they're not even in a headspace where they are at that objective place. And so they do have their identity challenged, as you mentioned.
And you take that one step further and you look at, the way that Srila Prabhupada in Krishna Consciousness writes about non-believers. You look at the way that Nityananda kind of talks about non-believers. You look at reading the Ramcharitmanas, which is the kind of poetic version of Valmiki's original Ramayana by Tulsidas, and it's kind of like you look at the way that the non-religious or people that don't believe in the notion of God in the way that they do, in the way that they've written it, and it's they're no diff, they're nothing more than just a piece of mud underneath somebody's shoe. So if you've got those notions coming through, I mean, like I'm reading the Ramcharitmanas at the moment and kind of going through it and kind of scribbling all over the book every time they kind of make a statement like that, which happens a lot, sadly. But if the notion of a person being non-religious is seen as something so kind of like unconstitutional, then they are going to be the pariah, and they are going to be the outgroup, and they are going to be the ones that we then look at in kind of spite and go, well, actually, you know what? They don't deserve half the stuff that they say they should. They are the traitors of their religious faith because they didn't stick with it, for example.
Exactly. And it seems, getting to the next phase of our conversation, that law enforcement seems to be utterly in the dark on these concepts. They have to, law enforcement has its own job, which is not necessarily being steeped in religious lore, but when you're confronted with people who are committing crimes against one another, it behooves law enforcement to understand why, so they can contextualize the situation that they are faced with and can apply the law appropriately.
Yeah.
One would hope. So, what have you found from this that happened? What actually happens, if that's the theory? What actually happens when honor killings and honor whatever else these guys get up to, because I understand they get up to beatings and rape and other things, all in the name of quote unquote honor. And I can only rationalize that in my own head by understanding that people can make any word mean anything they want it to, and can believe they can, you can twist meaning into anything. That's the only way that the word honor and this kind of violence go together. Is people are have very interesting understandings of these concepts.
Mm.
But where does law enforcement fall down with this based on what you've found?
This is, it fundamentally falls down because we're looking at families and we're looking at communities. So the problem is, or the issue with all of this, in a really small nutshell, is that people might not know that they're being abused and they might accept it as normality. Those that do know they're being abused by the language they're being told or the actions and the fact that they're being hurt, for example, be threatened to be killed or things like that. The issue is that the way that honor works is it's hidden. It's kept within. I think on the second page of my article, I provide a definition of what honor-based violence is, and by its nature, it's hidden.
Yeah, actually, you said honor-based violence, HBV, you say, can be described as follows: a collection of practices used predominantly to control the behavior of specifically women and girls within families or other social groups to protect or defend perceived cultural and religious beliefs, values, or social norms in the name of honor. By its nature, hidden. It is mainly, although not exclusively, perpetuated by the victim's family or community and may include collusion, acceptance, support, silence, or denial when perpetrators perceive that a relative has shamed the family and or community by breaking their honor code. This includes such behavior on the parts of some community leaders. Oh, yeah. Okay, good. On the part of
so that's within UK law, right? So that's the definition they use for honor-based violence. Interestingly, gender doesn't really have a notion when it comes to apostate abuse. It doesn't really matter. It's everybody.
Yeah, honor-based violence is not just executed against women or girls. Men also, or anyone, can suffer from that.
And be victim of it. So when we look at that and we look at why it's a difficult thing for law enforcement, well, no wonder. And we only have to look at the examples of things like, we had Victoria Climbié, who was, a case study for Victoria Climbié in the UK. There was Shafir Ahmed, who was killed. There was the case of Sabji and Surji Atwell. These weren't apostates predominantly, but these are people who were based on honor and were victimized as a result. So it's tricky. You're looking at, it's the same concerns that we had when domestic violence, came out, and we're like, oh, this is a thing, or the way that husbands abuse wives and things like that. Is this really a thing? Like, how do we even find that? How do we even know about that? How do we know about forced marriage? How do we know about female genital mutilation? How do we know about the practices that are happening behind closed doors to be able to utilize the appropriate legal framework? Well, firstly, you've got to have a legal framework that can allow you to utilize it. And secondly, therefore, you need a police force that can then do it. The UK are very good in that regards when we look at the way that domestic violence is tackled, honor-based violence is tackled, forced marriage, female genital mutilation. The police in the UK have done really, really well to kind of understand it, really understand what the cultural issues are, and being able to provide officers with that level of training so that they can work with families. Again, similar notion here. But in countries where it's not a thing, or where it's not understood, or where there's still blasphemy laws, like, we're basically just failing the victim based on the legislation, because not only are the family then abusing that victim, so is the state, because they don't even accept the fact that you can do that. You only have to look at the current case in Nigeria with Mubarak Bala, who's been arrested on the cause of insulting religion, and has been taken to Kano, which is primarily enforced with Sharia law. And we still don't know if he's alive or not. Nobody's got hold of him yet. So you only have to look at, and you look at Aisha Bibi in Pakistan, when she decided that Islam wasn't for her and she accepted Christianity. and the difficulties that caused within that nation. You only have to look at the way that I think it's Malaysia or Singapore or Indonesia kind of they kind of the way that they look at apostasy, or even Saudi Arabia, or even some parts in the United States. So law enforcement, how are they ever going to know this is an issue when social norms within that locale have accepted that, well, you can't insult it. You can't insult religious faith. So if you do, then whatever happens to you happens. You made the mistake. Putting a Facebook post out there of insulting religion or questioning religion can be seen as insulting religion and cause Mubarak to be arrested for it. So law enforcement has a very tricky job. If they are to protect people within their nation state, then they also need to look very closely at the legislation that they have as to how that legislation will actually help people that are being abused. Because if you have a nation state with blasphemy laws, you're not going to help the apostate that's being abused because your legislation believes that they deserved it. There's a problem.
Exactly.
So,
I'm looking at your definition here of this, and I'm realizing now as we're talking that a lot of the activities of destructive cults, when they are engaged in retribution against, revenge against former members, what goes on in Scientology, let's talk about that as a case study, right? Disconnection is one thing. Shunning, that's a fairly common practice amongst a lot of groups. But fair gaming is a term in Scientology for it's a label that they give. So you're fair game. We can come after you. Nobody's gonna go make a legal complaint because we're gonna forgive all the Scientologists who beat you up. Burn down your house, put a snake in your mailbox, flat your tires, whatever they do, key your car. We'll forgive all of that officially as a religious body because that person is fair game. They get whatever they get because they deserve it. That is done because the Scientologists hate that guy because he's dishonoring Scientology. And I had not really thought of it from that angle before, but that is an appropriate way of looking at that. It actually is honor-based violence.
And adding to the complication of this as well, a lot of religious people will say this goes completely against what the religious faith aims to do. And this is the point in that it's. I think my conclusion on the thought of the study is to not go, here's a problem in Scientology, in Islam, in Christianity, in Hinduism, and It's going, here's what people are doing in the name of Scientology, Islam.
Bingo. That's right.
And that's the difference. So I'm not targeting a religious faith. I'm targeting the way that people are utilizing that to rationalize their view that they're fair game.
Beautiful. And that is beautiful because it does embrace the entire picture. And you're absolutely right. It is all a matter, in terms of causative agents, it's all a matter of how the religious indoctrination is done in the first place. Because you're right. You have Christians, you have Muslims who will swear on a stack of Bibles, Qurans, Dianetics books, whatever, that their religion doesn't authorize that activity, yet it clearly states in the books that it does. But it's all a matter of interpretation, which is really a matter of indoctrination.
Well, then don't harm. I mean, that's
well, you think
you can contradict it, and that's the point. In that, which one are you taking? And
right.
And the thing is that I'm not interested in getting into a kind of scripture warfare with somebody who knows them back to back and going, well, because that's not my game, and that's not the purpose, and the aim isn't to, is to do that. It's to do what I said to do, which is looking at the decisions that people are making where we're harming other people and we're abusing other people. As I've got, I mentioned Sabji Atwal. She runs a charity in the UK called True Honor, where her sister-in-law was a bit westernized, so her in-laws arranged for her to go to Punjab and supposedly got her killed in Punjab for having those values, and she was threatened with the same. And despite pleading with the police, one police officer who's Clive Driscoll, who's a friend, actually took the opportunity to look into this story, and I think the mother-in-law and her husband were jailed as a result. Now, honor violence is there, like you can see it there. I forgot what my point was. I'm really sorry, but it's about showing that, you know, it's showing how difficult that that notion is for law enforcement as well, because they've got to know that it's an issue.
Well, exactly, and that's kind of the thing. You're going to have
and they don't,
atheists.
and their legislation doesn't support them either, because in the most nations where these issues are occurring, for example, you look at the heavily endorsed Christians ones or the Islamic ones, or whatever, their blasphemy laws stop a police or law enforcement from going, well, we know, you know, even if abuse is going on, well, actually, they've caused that, and that means that that means that nations basically need constitutional reform of going, blasphemy laws no longer need to exist. I mean, only Scotland have only recently got rid of this, for example.
Wow. Well, and this is where we really do need to get into the 20th century and come out of the Stone Age, and that's a lot of countries. And I definitely get your point.
21st century.
Oh no, I'm okay with the 20th. They can come up to the 20th. I'm okay with that. I mean, much less the 21st. I'm not asking too much. Okay, just come to the 20th.
Yeah.
But my point was, this is why academia needs to get on board with what you're talking about, needs to start looking into this, because they can often lead the way with intelligentsia and with the educated folk, and those are the guys who tend to move forward into legislation. You know, the people who get there are the people who get educated, and the educators don't have the literature to do this work yet, to provide that education so that these legislators can then enact laws that are not insane. I mean, is that the chain of events we're trying to sort of motivate here or be a catalyst for?
Well, we can highlight that of the 154 people who were assaulted within our study, only 9 of them reported it.
Right.
So that's 5.8% or something ridiculous like that. Out of the 71 people who said that they didn't report their abuse or their assault and things like that, 44% believe that it would be disrespectful to family dynamics or a betrayal of the family. 27% said the police wouldn't be able to help them anyway. And 10% were threatened with repercussions if they ever dared to do it. So we have victims within this study showing that they are at risk, which is the first issue. Second issue, they have no faith that their law enforcement will actually understand what they're going through and take that as an issue, which means that we're then increasing the likelihood for hidden wrongdoings to occur and them to be concealed by social norms. We're basically allowing and facilitating the abuse to occur because we wonder and struggle with the notion of, can we critique that, and are we racist for doing it? I don't care. There's abuse going on. You've got to challenge it. And the problem is that as society kind of progresses, we need to become more able and more comfortable with challenging the ideas that people hold. So in the perspective that people are being abused, we're then more likely to be able to tackle it. The moment we provide it a platform where we struggle to question it as law enforcement, who should not really have that concern, but the moment the law enforcement isn't able to do so, and neither will the legislation allow them to do so with blasphemy, etc., then all we're doing is creating a hidden population that's bigger than we know. This is just a tip in the iceberg, and that's the beauty of a study, in that it's only the people that were brave enough to actually be counted and provide themselves the opportunity to be counted. So
how do you move this ball down the road now? Because this is a start. Like you said, you've started something. And I'm talking to you about it because I think it's important. I
Yeah.
think there's a whole lot of people in the atheist community who are going to think that this has a lot of value. I hope they look at your paper. I hope they read it all the way through. It's really only a few pages. It's not that hard to get through.
Yeah, it's
And
not
I
like
was surprised. I actually, because some academic papers are not that. So this is good. It's a start. It definitely shows that there is a situation of hidden abuse, as you mentioned. So now what? How do we propagate this? How do we promote this? How do we get more academics to pay attention to this and take this matter seriously, so that more research that counts, not just memes and YouTube videos, but work that people are going to rely on and fall back on. How do we get that happening?
it's kind of like so I've been obviously with COVID at the moment. I've been watching a lot of Shark Tank. So it's the question that Kevin O'Leary always asks is how are you going to scale?
There you go.
And
There you go. That's exactly. I should
so,
have just said that. But I never watched Shark Tank, so I didn't know that was a good question. I'll use that in the future.
how are you going to scale something that you did in little old England, really? So the interesting point is that it's twofold. The first one is academics. So with the very fact that this is the first piece of academic research which looks at the abuse of apostates and argues they're hidden and argues it's happening and argues that there's issues with law enforcement worldwide as an issue, means that it's applicable wherever you are. So I'm glad that we didn't just bottleneck it to the UK. So that's the first thing, which means that any academic in any sphere of any academic university campus can pick it up and go, oh, here's an issue. Are these guys correct? Are they right? Are they wrong? Can I do more work on it? Can we test it and can we figure it out? And, can we understand it a little bit more? And you know what? There might be more academics that look at this and go, these guys don't know what they're talking about. And they will rip it to shreds, and they'll critique it and scrutinize it and produce a paper that basically questions what the hell have we done, and what we spent the last 5 years trying to write. And the moment that happens is the moment where academia starts talking about it. So me having conversations with yourself, because of COVID, a couple of conferences that I put myself forward for weren't able to go ahead, but they will the year after. So the moment that those things also happen, where more academics within the area can become accustomed to knowing that this exists, means that will get the conversation going amongst the academic community, and basically signaling the whole point of this. And I'm glad that the stats, and I'm glad that it worked out the way that it did. The whole point of doing this has become to identify to the academic community that people are being abused and you don't know. On top of that, what it's there for, and the second prong of it, is to provide activists with the opportunity to go, hey guys, all the stuff I've been saying along, like the difficulties and how traumatic it is, and how difficult and how arduous and how the struggle and why it's real and what's behind it all, we finally have an academic piece that tells you there it is. So the first prong is academic, definitely, because it's scientific, and psychological research needs academic rigor, and it needs to be questioned and looked at, and going to conferences and getting the word out there is part of that. The second prong of it is that, there are a lot of non-religious people that will look at this piece of research and go, haha, found it, here we go, let's use it. And fair play, like they can use it in those arguments. What I want people to understand from this, because the problem with the research is that it can also be taken in another way. So we've looked at Islam really shortly, previously, really quickly. Having a piece of research where we're arguing that you're more likely to, higher likelihood of receiving abuse for leaving a religious faith within a Muslim household, Christians not so far off, is it provides people such as your Ben Shapiro's and Tommy Robinsons and the Tim Allens of the world, or to look at this and go, I told you. The religions at fault, and they can use it in a way which we weren't wanting it to be used. And that's why I'm very careful in the way that I talk about it. But if anything, it provides those religious people that go, how dare people use the religious faith as a rationale for abusing another human being?
Right.
You
Right.
know, how dare they use that? And it's true, like, how dare they use the ideology of Islam or Christianity as a rationale for abusing another human being just because they have a difference of perspective?
Exactly.
And
That is
it provides the empowerment for that rhetoric to hopefully also come out in me going, you know, this is where it differs from previous kind of atheistic kind of non-religious stuff, and going, I'm not targeting the person, I'm targeting the fact that there are people using a religious faith to abuse people. That's a different argument to the, you know, Islam's at fault here.
mm,
It can
mm.
still be used with that. You know, you can get, you know, I'm sure one day there might be an opportunity in the future to talk to Sam Harris about what this actually means, perhaps, in going, well, actually, let's pick it apart. And are we then targeting the religious faith? Because where do all the ideas come from? Right?
Oh, there's no question that will be done, and
That will be
I'm
done.
actually encouraging that to be done to, you know, those who
Yeah,
follow me, because
Sam
that's
Harris,
another way of getting the word out there.
you know, Sam Harris come and knock on my door.
Yeah.
My email's at the bottom. But I think the argument is that, you know, it's looking at human behavior, going, what are they doing when they're threatened?
Right.
What are they doing when they're threatened?
Right. Exactly. But
What are the next steps?
we have
And
to
that's
be honest about the fact that religion has an undue influence on people's behavior and thinking. You know.
religion does, ideology does. So the way that
Yep.
the
That too.
way that ideology works, and it works now, you know, you look at the political left, you look at the political right, you look at the way that ideology works, they're not that different. And leaving either one within a liberal state, not that different. You know,
I
but
keep trying to bring this up to people, and they keep like telling me to stay in my lane and not talk about politics. And it is
I'm not.
exactly for what you just said that I can't.
I'm saying that this is the way that ideologies work, right?
Right.
So whichever one whichever one you assign to, whichever one you believe in, whichever one you hold dear, whichever one you believe in principally, find the differences. The thing is, it's based on the way that people then use it.
Right.
Because just because it's written doesn't mean you do. You know, you still have to kind of go through the processes of going, I'm gonna use that notion and do X as a result. So again, the next steps are, firstly, the academic community need to, you know, all the people that have talked about domestic violence, you know, intimate partner violence, you know, sexual abuse, domestic abuse, domestic violence, and honor-based violence, and all of that, and everything put together. They're the people that need to look at this and go, oh, here's an additional one we hadn't added in.
Good.
The scientific community needs to look at it and go, okay, what are they saying? Is there merit in that? By all means, go for it. On top of that, we need people. The moment the academic community starts talking about it is the moment that governments also start being clued up on, here's something. And
My point.
the point of
Exactly
this
that.
is that if there are more and more people in official positions that look at this piece of research, accept the flaws because it's the first one there, and go, actually, you know what? Even if it is the first one, there are victims that are being abused that we don't know, and neither is that within the legislation. Maybe we need to step up.
Exactly.
We're failing people, and that's the point. The whole point of this is that it's not about which religion's worse than the other, which ideology. You know, we're not sending out. You know, we're not playing. You know, this isn't the UFC of religions.
Right.
This is literally looking at the fact that we're failing people by not identifying that this occurs. So what do? Governments need to stand up and go, actually, this is a thing.
Good.
People in government, holler at me. I'll come and talk to you. You know, wherever you're at. And that's the point, and that's where things like this then get raised as going, well, actually, this exists, and then people are going through that. I mean, the amount of people I spoke to when I did the study that are religious, and I'm just like, people leave, or heck, people get abused for leaving. Like, people don't even know that it happens.
Of course they don't. Of course.
And you know what? That's partly just because it's the same way as I was when I was Hindu, perfectly happy. Why would I leave? I was perfectly, like, everything was fine. Why would I leave? It worked, for
Right.
example. So those are the next steps. And doing, having conversations with yourself, having conversations with more people in trying to highlight that issue and getting more people to become aware of it. And trying to highlight that this isn't an anti-religious piece of academic work is necessary, so that people who are religious don't get threatened by what's written within it.
Sounds
It's not
good
about
to
being
me.
threatened by it. It's about going, this, people are being abused. That's the bottom. Sabji always says, that's the bottom line. People are being abused. Abuse is abuse. Like, I don't care which reason you give me. So again, I don't care which religion you use.
Fair enough. Well, I think we've painted a pretty clear picture here, and I think it's certainly enough to point in the right direction. And like I said, I've got links to this paper you've written. Now, also to reaching you directly. People might have questions about that, want to know how to reach you. So your email is harry.k.parek@gmail.com.
Yep.
I've got that in the notes below, and they can also find you on Twitter at Mr. Hari Parekh.
Yeah.
Link also below.
Good of it.
So, where are you going next with this? Are you doing another study on this, or are you trying to drum up that, or what are you working on now?
I think at the moment the aim is let's get people to know that this exists,
Good.
because the whole point of this is, and this is the privileged position that I'm in, is that I didn't go through any of this. I am an apostate, but I didn't suffer the same way that these people have and countless others have. So I'm in a very privileged position to say, what I've done is I had an opportunity to write a master's thesis, and I decided to do it on behalf of the people that are currently hidden and struggling and are abused, to say, let's give them a voice and let's identify to the academic sphere that they exist. The fact that that's created a publication and it's an actual piece of research that's open-ended so anybody can read it is fabulous, because anybody and everybody, as long as they got the link, can go and read the whole thing without worrying about paying 30 quid to a journal, is a big thing, because what we've done is we've provided the opportunity for people to know that it exists. So on behalf of all the people that are currently in a position where they feel they can't leave, or they can't do this, or they can't do that, and they feel stuck and they're in the middle of abuse, or even with COVID and they're isolated and they can't get out of their home at the moment and they don't have the opportunity to leave, it's on behalf of all those people that this study came out. So as a result of that, if we can get as many people to know that this piece of work exists, hand in hand, what we're then doing is getting people in hopefully privileged positions of power to then go, oh, where do we stand on that? And that's where governments in nations can then question that. Heck, that's where things like Amnesty International and the UN can look at their definitions of abuse and look at it and go, actually, we missed this.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Excellent, man. Well, thank you very much for taking the time to tell me about all of this, and reach out to me and get in touch with me, because I think this is valuable, and I am definitely on board with everything you've said here about getting this stuff out there and drumming up more interest in this. And eventually, this is how change occurs. It's slow. It's way too slower than any of us would like, but it is a process, and the process is at least now going, and we can move that ball down the road, as I'm keen to say. Now there's a ball on the road to move, and it's shocking to me. The most shocking thing about our conversation has been the awareness of how few people are actually aware of this in the first place. Because this is my world. So I'm like all about this stuff, right? And so, of
Yeah.
course, you assume everybody knows what you know, which is completely unfounded, totally unwarranted way of thinking. But, I'm human. So,
I think the best way to visualize it, which makes it make sense, is how do you know there's no domestic violence happening in the house next to you? How do you know?
right,
And you don't.
right,
How do you know that a child isn't being abused? How do you know that a family member isn't being abused in your community or the next door neighbors, whatever? You wouldn't know, because the moment everybody walks outside, they're all happy. People are people, and the way that the definition works for it, it's secretive and it's hidden, and welcome to the difficulty of it. But to the people that you know, and the people that listen to you frequently, and the people that you've spoken to as well, it kind of provides them with a piece of evidence to go, oh no, what I went through, it's this thing's real. Like, this isn't just, you can't just look at me and go, oh, I'm a crazy person who just got out of religious faith and don't believe anymore, and therefore you can't trust me. No. This is a thing. Like, this exists, and they don't have to then point to. It's like at the moment with the COVID pandemic, where people are using YouTube as a reason to create control, to create conspiracy theories as to this is not being real or whatever. No longer does the person who's been through this, no longer does the activist who's been shouting about this, no longer does a person who feels that they're isolated and alone has to feel that they have nothing to back them up apart from their own story. They now have a scientific paper that goes, you know what? Here's the evidence of it. It exists, and I'm just one more added to that. And you know what? There's 228 people in there. I bet you there are countless more that we just weren't able to get in the moment of doing that.
Yeah, exactly. Cool, man. All right. Well, thank you very much. Thanks for the work that you've done and that you will continue to do, I'm sure, as this goes forward. Okay, folks out there, I want to know your feedback on this. I want to hear from you. All right. Questions, comments, feedback, leave them in the show notes, or rather in the comment section on YouTube. I'm pointing below because that's where the comment section is on YouTube, and or at sensiblyspeaking.com, where this podcast is hosted. Thank you very much for coming around and listening to us go on about this at a mad rate. I hope you found it interesting, informative, and educational. And if you did, you consider supporting this channel through Patreon. That is what keeps the lights on and the show going here. All right, folks, talk to you next week. Bye-bye.